Hello everyone, Jules here for That Film Theory, and put simply, I love the Toy Story franchise. Now, I was blessed with the fact that I grew up with the Toy Story films basically hitting the same key moments of my life, of childish wonder into confused, bold youth, to university know-it-all, and the meeting and departing of friends along the way. It has been an emotional roller coaster for sure, but one that many thought would be over with Toy Story 3. However, as has been proved with Toy Story 4, it is here to stay, and you know what? While probably not being as impactful as the previous three, it is a well-crafted tale that closes the arc of one of its central figures, Woody the cowboy. And it got me thinking about this cowboy, about his life and his struggles, about how he's got a really dark secret. And with the help of Simon Gallagher, we want to present to you a theory about the snake in his boot that's been poisoning his life for years. As I'm Jules, this is That Film Theory, and here is the real untold tragedy of Woody. We've seen Woody repeatedly grapple with mortality anxiety. We've seen him watch his friends and fellow toys falling away, and we've witnessed him leave Andy's life before finding a new home with Bonnie in Toy Story 3. And this is a happy ending for the character, and one that gave him a newfound identity, because he seeks validation from ownership, and he ends this trilogy being loved and included as he was at the start of the tale. But that characteristic is a key one. His drive to lead the toys comes from his position originally as Andy's favourite, a position that he wanted to keep at any extent as shown through his first interactions with Buzz. And he had to come to terms with the man from infinity and beyond, but he never really truly addressed this core character flaw until the third film. Now, in Toy Story 3, we see him confront the idea that kids move on and he has to accept that, as if he doesn't, well, Lotso definitely provides an example of how twisted things can become. And so we leave that trilogy with Woody in a new family, hopefully having dealt with that concept of rejection and acceptance. And I say hopefully, because that ending doesn't actually resolve his issues. What's to stop him from becoming obsessed again and once more, as Bonnie grows up, feeling rejected? All he's done is actually buy himself some time. Yet why is he so obsessed? Well, that could be down to something that's never really been explained up until Toy Story 4. Since the first movie, we've all just merrily accepted that Woody and Andy were together forever. He's never mentioned anyone else before him, and you think that he would have if he was a pre-owned toy, or even if it was somebody else in Andy's family, he would mention them. After all, Lotso and Jessie are both emotionally devastated by the rejection of previous owners, so it's not like toys simply forget these factors. In fact, in a brief moment, Toy Story 4 establishes that Jessie still struggles with abandonment issues when she's locked up in a cupboard. Rejection doesn't just go away, and neither do the memories of previous owners. So Woody can't have had a previous owner. We know he doesn't deal well with change. He's dangerously committed to his kid, and Toy Story 4 repeatedly mentions the fact that he's still hung up on Andy rather than focusing on Bonnie. Now, at first, this is painted as him responding to Bonnie not viewing him as a favourite toy, but it's more than that really, because Woody did have a past before Andy, and by implication, it was an incredibly sad one. Just as Toy Story 2 hinted, Toy Story 4 establishes that Woody is an antique. He was made sometime in the 1950s by his own admission, which makes him the perfect target for Gabby Gabby when she's looking to steal his voice box to replace her own defective one. It's not just a throwaway decision for that story element either. It's the whole crux of why Woody is the way he is. Fundamentally, you have to ask yourself, what was Woody doing for the 40 years or so before he became Andy's favourite toy? When we meet Woody, he's driven by a sometimes crippling fear of toys being given away or lost or left behind. That's his role as the leader of the toys, and it's something that he's particularly good at. When he meets up with Jessie, Stinky, Pete, and Bullseye in the first sequel, he befriends them easily, not simply because they are from the same brand, but because he wants to save them from redundancy. Even in Toy Story 3, he's sympathetic to Lotso's broken mentality because he is a lost toy, and that is Woody's weakness. Now, looking a little deeper at what we know about Woody and his singular commitment to Andy, there's no way that he would have just had an owner in those 40 years. If he had, then he would be showcasing the signs of repeated rejection and would probably talk about his previous owners, seeing as, well, he's clearly doing that with Bonnie's toys in Toy Story 4 when referring to Andy. And he doesn't, so what does that mean? Well, the reality is, sadly, that Woody was just like Stinky Pete and Lotso for those 40 years. He never had an owner and he never had a purpose. He was the lead toy from a show that was dropped before its finale because of a lack of interest. His show wasn't cancelled because the network were monsters, and Stinky Pete didn't just sit mint in his box because somebody recognized his value back in the 1950s. Both were there because nobody cared. Now, Woody was a rejected toy from a redundant TV show, and nobody wanted to love him until Andy came along. That can be the only way that Woody had no idea about Woody's Roundup or how he belonged to a whole fandom back in the 1950s. He didn't experience any of it because he was never loved and never knew his part in a community of love. His reality was colder, more isolated, and completely removed from everything that he was designed to be. It's then that you realize why he's so keen to help abandoned toys. He wants them to feel the love that he never had, and even goes so far as to endanger their secret by interacting with Sid, and again when Jessie and Bullseye just appear out of nowhere in Toy Story 2 for Andy. And it's why he's such a soft touch for the enemies of the films, because he recognizes that isolation is at their crux. That's also why Woody is taken in by Stinky Pete in Toy Story 2, despite Andy still being young enough to want to play with him. Part of him knows what comes after Andy rejects him because he's been there before. So he's willing to entertain the idea of becoming a museum exhibit, as if it gives him some sort of refound purpose. It's Woody's unspoken tragedy that sets him apart from the other toys, rather than their naivety. Throughout the series, he's painted as being much more aware of his surroundings, even without the revelation of toy existence that comes in with Toy Story 4, which absolutely makes no sense when you think about it, really. It's not a simple matter of Woody being big-hearted or a father figure to the other toys. He's no better than them in moral terms, and he shouldn't have anything within him that makes him so different. And yet, while all the other toys are driven solely by a desire to be playthings for Andy and don't wrestle with the concepts of their impending doom of being given away or sold anywhere near as much as Woody does, he is dangerously anxious about the idea of his own redundancy. That's not even something that really occurs to the other toys until he meets Jessie in Toy Story 2. Even Wheezy, remember him back in the day? He doesn't have any issues with being thrown away, he just accepts it as a fact of life. And so too does Bo Peep when we see her being sold in Toy Story 4 in that flashback. Woody has invented the anxiety of being passed on because of his own fears of redundancy that were forged into him through a 40-year isolation and being unloved. And it takes a little spork and the return of Bo Peep in Toy Story 4 for him to give up on his past and the idea that a toy needs ownership to be validated. What they need, he realizes, is friends. We should have seen that all along. I mean, from the very moment that Randy Newman started singing about it, I mean, when you think about it, it's actually very on the nose. But hey-ho, that's not the point here. When Bo Peep comes back into Woody's life, he has his epiphany, and it's thanks to Forky that he comes to grips with his obsession. I say that because Forky is basically the exact challenge to Woody's fundamental belief in needing an owner. Like, Forky has no concept of ownership because his existential crisis is focused around him believing that he's not a toy and wanting to be thrown away as trash. Woody wants to save him for his own good, not simply because Bonnie loves Forky, but because if Forky is allowed to be thrown away, it confirms what he's always feared the most, that kids move on and that toys are fundamentally replaceable, no matter how much they appear to be loved. After 40 years without love, he was showered with it from Andy, and then he saw that fade again, and it broke him. He saw Lotso go through the same thing and Jessie before him, and his quest to reunite Forky with Bonnie is really an attempt to fight against inevitability once more. Woody is fighting as much for himself when he's saving Forky as he is for Bonnie's sake. And across his adventures with this plucky little spork, we answer questions that the trailer kind of played off as jokes. That "why am I alive" line elicited a few giggles here in the office. But in the context of a toy coming to understand that purpose comes from within and not from what's around you, is a line that drives home a very, very important message. 40 years of isolation has bred within Woody a desire to be loved, a need to be loved. But it's only when he recognises that toys don't need to be owned to be happy that he's able to figuratively and literally move on from the cycle. So while Toy Story 3 might have presented this idyllic continuation of the ownership pattern, Toy Story 4 came along and broke it, showing Woody going on to a new adventure with Bo without the shackles of his previous trauma. This is what makes Toy Story 4 a strangely important film. And while we may be quick to dismiss it as a cash grab, and trust me, there are elements of this in that film, the final message is one of great importance. Woody is now free. Woody's story is closed. Woody's past pain has finally been addressed, and we can all learn something from this. Don't let people get you down and own you. Don't give yourself to others in order to find validation from them, because you watching this video matter so much that words can't express it. And because you matter, you are worthy of purpose, and therefore you can decide your own narrative and the acceptance that comes with it. That's a good message. And I hope you enjoyed this theory. As you can tell, it's something that Si and I think is very important. And please let me know down below what you thought about it, as well as any other theories that we might have missed. And if you want to chat about this further, you can do so by following me at RetroJ over on Twitter. As always, I've been Jules, you have been awesome, never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon.